I am very, very thrilled to welcome all of you here today at the Beyond GDP Forum. My name is Stephanie. I'll be your Master of Ceremony today. And a little note, also the new Deputy CEO at B-Lab Switzerland. Please, if ever you would like to connect, I am based in Zurich, so it might be a bit closer for some of you. Just reach out, and I promise I can offer one of the best coffees you've tasted. So, why am I thrilled? I'm thrilled because this room is filled up with leaders from academia, from business, from civil society, and from government. And we all here agree on three things. We agree that the stability of our economy is dependent on the health of our planet. We all here agree that GDP is not enough to measure progress. And with your participation and your presence here today with us, you also have agreed and expressed your interest and willingness to help us co-create a solution for this. Today's event consists of three parts. We are first going to share a contextualization of why we believe this initiative is crucial and necessary. It will then be followed by a panel discussion by some of our esteemed participants here, leaders from business, academia, and civil society, and government. Before we get to the third part, which is the consultation which we're going to frame in table discussion formats. So this is why you find yourself surrounded with people on your table. So first off, the first person I would like to invite to join me here on stage is André Hoffmann. I have to admit that every single time it's getting a bit more complicated to introduce you, because the more I read about you, the more I'm getting nervous. So I'm warning you, probably next time I'm going to do the same as everyone else, which is I'm going to try and get a selfie with you in your book, because you're not only the co-founder of Intent, chairman at Roche, but also a very vocal business leader advocating for the importance of the environment. So thank you very much for sharing your opening remarks for today's forum.
Should I take the microphone? Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, Stefan just talked about nervosity. I'm even more nervous, I must say. It's really quite exciting to see that we are able, on the first day in Davos, to attract as many people to a subject as, what's the word, uninspiring as GDP. I mean, GDP is a you know, the economist who actually devised GDP, he was called Kuznets, and he advised the American government about 200 years ago, or 150 years ago. And he said, you know, this is a very interesting way to look at the economy because it talks about growth, but it talks about nothing else. So please don't use it. So anyway, we have used it. We have made it the reference number we need to use, and we look constantly at growth of the economy, completely disregarding all the negative sides that it brings about, the impact it is having on the social, the natural, and the human capital. Now, the fact that we have all these measurements of the economy is something that should guide our decisions when we take decisions about asset allocation of our businesses. And at the moment, we really don't. We only look at growth. It's like if you look at the value of something, the profit and loss dimension without looking at the content of what actually is there. So you can sell the planet in order to buy growth, and that's what's been happening. So here we have an opportunity to launch a new measurement, and the fact that we have people standing in the door trying to come in, and we have a waiting list longer than I can remember, it shows that we are touching a raw nerve. We are touching a part of society which are really important in the way we're going to go forward. Now, Switzerland has been, as a nation, extremely apt at sort of sensing the wind into which these directions are going that's a mixed metaphor, sorry. And it's important that we should capture this and that we bring that forward. So absolute congratulations to Jonathan and his team to have been able to bring that all together, because now we're going to be here starting to talk about CP. Now, CP is the Swiss Index, Swiss Impact Performance Index. You see the old habits, performance and prosperity. Anyway, rather than going into the technical explanation, which, as you can see, I'm not particularly able to do, I just wanted to yet again enthusiastically support this initiative. I'm delighted that we can do that here at the SDG tent. The organization sponsoring all this is called Intent. It's something my wife and I have started. We are here as guests of the SDG tent, but as of next year, we will be actually taking over the whole management of it, so that we can continue to create these kinds of events which are supposed to accelerate our move towards this sustainable prosperity. And the sustainable prosperity, as we all know, has to be inclusive, but that's going to be the debate of another day, but the CP will allow us to look at prosperity in a sustainable manner here in Switzerland. And thank you very much to all of you to come. Very much looking forward to the result of our conversation. And now, Stephanie, who do I give the microphone back to? To you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, André. So the next person also needs almost no introduction, which is Jonathan Norman, one of the co-founders from B-Lab Europe and the founder and CEO from B-Lab Switzerland.
Thank you very much. Nervosity, yes. Excitement, really. When I see the crowd, when I see how much of you have been before today raising question about what does it all about going beyond GDP? What does mean prosperity? What is the role of Switzerland? A lot of questions. So let me start by welcoming first and Your Excellencies, dear honored guests, dear partners, dear representative of the government, a warm welcome being with us today. I'd like to make a little special thanks to André and Rosalie for their outstanding continual engagement and for hosting us today. And I'm thrilled to address to you today here, but also we have a live stream. We didn't mention that, right? We have a live stream, so we have an online community following up the first part of the session today. And so really thrilled to address you today at the Go Beyond GDP Forum, first session, and especially in such turbulent time, right? Knowing what's going to happen at the Capitol today. Oh, let's be a bit provocative, right? That's the tone that we set for the day. And so this gathering of minds and leaders really will bring and share this common vision of what means sustainability and prosperity, and obviously prosperous future that goes also beyond Switzerland, knowing how Switzerland is designed, and I will come back on that. So today's forum is all about a simple fact. Information, if we have the right information, and if we don't have the right information, we cannot act. That's all it will be about. And it questions also the whatever figure or metrics we use are ways to see the world, right? And so, and if so, which one are there? What are the figures and which one we are following, right? And that's what we want to bring here today, not just to talk about it, but really to get your input, get your feedback, get views from different leaders, from various communities, from the businesses, from civil society, from government, obviously. So that's also bring me to just take a moment to breathe and think about the immense cost of inaction today. We're talking about more than 25 trillion annually that cost the biodiversity loss That's the annual cost of biodiversity loss, 25 trillion. It's a quarter of the global GDP. Let's play a little bit with numbers, guys. We need to think about it. And, you know, the financial and social stakes are far greater than we often realize. And so think also about the climate change that is projected today to slash 7% of corporate earnings annually by 2035. So this call for businesses, this isn't just environmental issue. This is long-term viability and profitability. So there is really a business case around that. I have to share today here during the WEF week, obviously, this year again, the Global Risk Report reaffirmed that aside of inequality, aside of technological risk, misinformation, or interstate conflict, the most important structural risks are environmental by nature in a long 10 years view. So that's really something that we need to get, and there is no doubt that this should be the focus of today's action and tomorrow, right? And so we must ask ourselves really how we can transform and move from reactive measure to really proactive solution. That's really the call of today, and even more on those, as I mentioned, turbulent time that we are living. And that's bring me to hold and just clarify the role of Switzerland, because we are in Davos, we are doing the WEF week, it's an international setup, but let's talk about Switzerland and the unique role that holds Switzerland and the significant opportunity also to globally lead decarbonization, knowing that we obviously operation and result that really bring, we know, 6 to 9 times our domestic emission. And the financial flow, I would say the broad economic and financial flow that we operate around Switzerland and originating from Switzerland contribute to emissions that are 40 to 80 times our domestic total. We have an accountability, and with accountability comes action, and leadership. And that's what we believe, that even Switzerland is a very small country, geographically speaking, there is a really need for having this management of the outsized impact that Switzerland have across economic and financial activity. So let's go into the topic. Why go beyond GDP? We know that numerous initiatives have been initiated. This is not a new topic, but why now? Why today? And let's acknowledge that while GDP has been as a cornerstone of economic measurement during decades, it fails really to capture the quality of what we define as growth or its broader impact. Narrative is important. Why I mention how we define growth. We just need to get aligned. We just need to align ourselves on a new narrative. And then what happened? We change the externalities. That's really something that we need you, because this narrative needs to be translated on a sector specific. This narrative needs to be translated for policy development. This narrative needs to be developed with investors, and more than ever, with citizens and consumers. So we believe that while still is missing a comprehensive approach, and today in the panel you will discover and get fantastic inputs around initiatives that are putting out those go beyond GDP metrics and indicators, we believe that there is really a call now that needs to integrate those insights and obviously drive actionable change, as I mentioned. And this is really, for me, the key element of being here today. We will talk, we will act, and we want to follow up those actionable solutions with you. And not to mention, many of projects exist in Switzerland. We have done a mapping around all existing initiatives, piece and bit, focusing on green GDP, focusing on well-being, on social, behavioral element, on diversity. It's time for Switzerland, in this global leadership role, to get people together, to get all institution and organization together to reduce the lack of synchronicity. Say it differently, to tackle what I see as being active for the past 20 years in Switzerland, leading sustainability topic, the fragmentation issues between our organization, between our various stakeholders from business, community, civil society, policymaker. That's what we want to address, and that's why we've designed this initiative, the Swiss Impact and Prosperity Initiative, codename CP. Easy to remember, right? Make me think about a little dog. I don't know why, but yeah, I'm not a comms guy, as you know. So no, you know, we have designed this initiative, and it's really built around existing framework while addressing their gaps, simply said. So what I really like you to capture here is that this initiative, this new initiative, really aims to redefine success by reconciling the four capitals that André mentioned: human, nature, social, and economic capital. Not to redefine, rethink, reshape, reconcile. And that's, again, here a narrative element. When you try to reconcile, you engage a very different process than when you try to redefine or to change or to rethink, right? You need to think about the interests of each other. You need to get together. You need to engage of those dialogue. And that's what the platform will do across various sectors, topic in Switzerland. And that's, don't want to share too much at the moment, but that's, you know, the idea of assessing Switzerland prosperity and accountability by considering those social and environmental factors in a very some way. And what we will want to address is also how Switzerland take into account the externalities alongside of traditional economic performance metric. That's it's all about. Nothing new under the sun. What is new? It's to have a platform, it's to have those collaboration, it's to have a joint plan and deliver it. It's damn needed. Sorry for my words, but it's really needed at the moment, more than ever. So yeah, this initiative is not just about measurement, obviously. As I mentioned, it's really also around to overcome the fragmentation efforts and also, for me, the narrative element. I won't to go too much in detail, but let's think about, you know, how we can mobilize those community, businesses, civil society today, and more than everything, think about the ambition that requires such collaboration and obviously the commitment that goes with. So I'm looking forward to the input that you will gather today, that we will gather today. So let's move from I and you to us today, and hopefully it will allow us to really make this open, co-created initiative a success. I thank you very much, and I hand over to you, Stephanie, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So the next person I would like to introduce is an award-winning political economy expert, and since September 2024, also the president of IMD. So David has very much focused with his work on equipping leaders on how to navigate the complexities at the intersection of politics and business. More so, really, to help them address the challenges such as economic nationalism, diverse stakeholder demands, but also within the contentious political landscape. So, David. You have here your microphone.
Thank you, Stephanie, and welcome everyone. When I see this picture, I notice how quickly I'm aging in this new role of just 4 months. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you. Thank you, André, Rosalie, Intent, B-Lab, many of the contributors here for the opportunity. I don't have slides, so I don't think I need this one. Thank you so much. It's rare for me. I usually show up with a lot of slides, but not today. So I lead IMD. We're global business school headquartered in Lausanne, beautiful Lausanne, but we work with leaders and organizations around the world to help them transform towards that goal that we all share of a more prosperous, sustainable, and inclusive world. And among business schools, we pride ourselves in being forward-looking, which is why this question before us, how do we actually think about measurement of our economic activity differently, is very, very exciting. I will put in a little plug for our forward-looking thought leadership. You have a little card in front of you that gives you access to our knowledge hub, and we'd love to get your feedback on some of the ideas that we share, of course on sustainability, but also other topics through that. Let me try to frame this session by telling you a little bit about my experience in the classrooms. I'm a teacher before anything else, and I've been teaching, as Stephanie said, for a long time at this nexus of business and politics, and I teach a course in our MBA program. Now, you need to understand at IMD, sustainability is really important. We reorganized our curriculum a number of years ago around sustainability, and our participants who come to our program know that sustainability is central. We kicked off the program just a couple of days ago with an address by Peter Bacher, the CEO of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who made very effectively the case that prosperity and sustainability go together. So our students know this, and then I teach them a course on business and society, and I kick off the course with a little simulation. I don't tell them a whole lot about the course, but we play a game, and in groups they need to manage a plant, and they have to make decisions every single round about whether they discharge pollution from their plant into a lake or whether they treat that discharge and therefore avoid that pollution. And they quickly find out that by discharging, they make more money. And as you can imagine, what ends up happening is they start competing with one another and who can make the most money, and they start discharging, and the lake gets worse and worse and worse. And they sort of do understand that that impacts their earnings because their returns actually start declining, but they can't really get out of this. And what is powerful about this lesson is that they're experiencing for the first time a fundamental economic concept that Jonathan mentioned that is called negative externalities. In my view, one of the most important economic concepts that is really, really poorly understood. What happens in this game is not that good people suddenly turn out to be bad people, or that we had all kinds of admissions errors and we have a group of sort of eco-terrorists in the program. What ends up happening is that they're getting bad information because the cost that they're imposing on the community is not factored in to the information they receive. That's the very idea of a negative externality, right? That the private cost is different from the social cost. And what ends up happening is you make bad decisions. If you don't receive proper information about the impact of your actions, you make bad decisions. And then the rest of the course is about how do we unpack this? What are some of the tools that are available that can actually align private and public benefit? Now, what is nice about doing this with the simulation is we can actually run a parallel simulation and see what happens when people receive the correct information where the cost is included. And of course, the students are stunned to see that they could have made much more money individually and collectively if they had properly taken care of the environment. And of course, it's a simple game and it has a lot of assumptions, but I think it's a pretty powerful metaphor for the situation that we find ourselves in. We are optimizing based on incomplete information. And so as we're growing our profits, as André said before, we're throwing costs onto society. And that is irresponsible, but it's also irrational because we could be doing better, all of us individually and collectively, if we had the best information. So of course, there have been efforts over the last several decades, in fact, to provide more non-financial information to investors, but also to managers to make better decisions. And many of you are much more familiar with these various standards and protocols and the role that they play in shaping decision-making by senior executives, in shaping decision-making, of course, all by investors as well. But many of these standards, and they're increasingly being mandated. Of course, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the EU makes that a requirement now, despite the fact that The German government seems to be trying to wiggle out of the commitments previously made. These disclosures are mandatory in many countries now around the world, but they operate at the company level. We don't have the equivalent at the economy level to actually elevate this up, and this is why this conversation is so important. What does that look like in practice? I'll share just one example with you. My colleague Jean-Pierre Dantin is here, who is one of the founders of something that is called Enterprise for Society, E4S. It's a collaboration among the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, EPFL, one of the best engineering schools in the world, the University of Lausanne, one of the leading Swiss institutions. We have both of their leaders here, and IMD. And we work together, bringing our faculty together, bringing our networks together, bringing our students together to think about how to align better business and markets with the goals or the needs of people and planet. And so they've done some really, really interesting work in coming up with something, Jonathan, that you referred to, which is green domestic product, right? GRDP, and estimated if we actually properly accounted for the cost of emissions and some pollution, what would Swiss GDP look like? And Jean-Pierre, you shared with me, it'd be about 3.5% lower than the actual figure if we properly accounted for the cost of emissions, the cost of certain pollutants, some heavy metals, and so on. But it doesn't at all include biodiversity loss, which is a really, really important one. It doesn't include a whole range of social factors that you might also want to consider. The good news is that that gap between GDP and green GDP has been shrinking somewhat. But that's, again, looking at it domestically. And, of course, it doesn't look at the global impact of Swiss customers and Swiss businesses. But it's a really interesting way of then not just looking at the performance of Switzerland's economy, but also comparing Switzerland's economy to those in other countries where that gap might, in fact, be widening. So this is one example of how we might go about doing this. So I hope I made the case why a measure at the economy level and the aggregate level that actually takes into consideration these externalities is important. Why is Switzerland a good place to lead this? So I'm not Swiss, but I'm very happy to live in Switzerland, and I'm learning so much about my adopted home. I came here 4.5 years ago. Many of you are visiting Switzerland, and I'm sure you're struck by some of the same things that continue to strike me. This is a very pragmatic country. It's a very pragmatic country. I find myself continuously thinking, somebody applied common sense to this. The fact that that is noteworthy tells you something about where some other places are. Switzerland is also a place that doesn't necessarily move first on issues or doesn't move very quickly, but when it moves with a whole lot of social cohesion and support. You don't get the kind of oscillation in policy that we're probably about to experience on this January 20th, where an incoming administration spends the first day trying to undo everything that the previous administration did. Switzerland does not work that way. When Switzerland moves, there's usually a lot of support. And lastly, Switzerland has this remarkable ability to think long-term. I shared this with our panelists in one of the pre-calls. I'm just astonished by this. Outside the train station in Lausanne, there's a sign informing people about a construction project, and it happily proclaims that the project will conclude in 2037. In most other places, there would be protests, riots outside a construction site for another 12 years. But here in Switzerland, people are really excited about, the long-term investment that we're making in the rails and the train station and making the country more livable. So I think Switzerland is a great place because of that pragmatism, because of that cohesion, because of that long-term orientation. But I think there's one other reason, and that is because I think initiatives like this are the way Switzerland likes to lead, not through proclamations or grand gestures, but lead by example. And with your support, I think we can move closer towards that. And given the importance of Switzerland in the world, as you demonstrated, Jonathan. I think this is a very worthwhile enterprise, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to help kick it off at this event. Thank you very much. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce 4 extraordinary leaders who will join me on stage for a panel discussion. Ana Fontcuberta Morral is the president of EPFL, the institution I just mentioned, a role that she assumed on January 1st. She's a professor of material science, one of the world's leading scientists, and we're absolutely delighted to have her in this panel. Please come up, Ana. Ambassador Andrea Rauber Saxer is the head of bilateral economic relations at the Swiss State Secretariat of Economic Cooperation, the SECO. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Why don't you go there, and then I can stay on this side right here. Fantastic. Stephanie Hart is Executive Vice President, Head of Operations at Nestlé. In that role, she oversees 80% of Nestlé's global purchasing and over 300 factories. Thank you very much for joining us. And Sandrine Dixson-Declève is the co-president of the Club of Rome. We're delighted to have you as well. Thank you so much for coming up. Stephanie, we have one microphone. This is the second one? Okay, very good. So I will give this one. Who was I going to start with? Sandrine. There you go. We'll start with you.
Okay.
So, Sandrine, you are involved, you have been involved in a number of these initiatives to think about, to take us beyond GDP. Mm-hmm. I'll sit down at some point. It's probably a little bit odd if but this way I can see you better. Okay. I'll sit down and just...
What I love is the fact that we have a panel of 4 incredible women.
I think that's amazing.
Thank you for that.
I think it's extraordinary.
This is how we move beyond GDP.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So, what can you share with us about some of the initiatives that you've been involved in to better capture the social and environmental impact of economic activity and to align these indicators more?
Thank you for that question. So I am actually the former president of the Club of Rome, but still very much involved as both a global ambassador and honorary president. And also I'm the executive chair of Earth for All, which is an initiative very much built on the limits to growth. And what I would like to bring in is obviously 50 years of exchange between the Club of Rome's members and governments around how could we actually make the incredible speech of Bob Kennedy in 1968 a reality, which is we place a value on everything that actually is not of true value or does not matter. And I think we are in a place, as much as we're living in a very dystopian world right now, and let's be very honest, and thank you for your provocations and also yours as well. We have governments that are moving very much backwards and going back to GDP, anchoring everything in productivity at a time when we know that what we need to do is really move beyond. We have 5 countries that have shown that that's possible, the well-being economy governments, and they've anchored this in new indicators that are based on 3 core pillars. Environmental pillars with very clear criteria, as well as economic pillar, which has the GDP indicators built in, and then, of course, the social indicators. And so when you spoke about the necessary green GDP, I would just add that we've very much seen in these countries, but also in the work that we're now doing in the European Commission, there is a new proposal that I've been part of called GDP plus 3. There are other governments now that are looking at this GDP plus 3. By the way, there are about 1,000 indicators out there that continuously are being brought back. And what we're seeing is, at this time, when we're being told that we should go back to burn, baby, burn, this is actually where we can really create an alternative future for people, where we can give them the proper indicators to measure what matters to their lives. So we've got the indicators. We've got the new formulas of how to move forward. We have proposals in the OECD. The UN has just put forward a high-level panel. The European Commission is moving forward with its analysis. The trick now, and we've got the 5 governments, the trick now is for all of us as a community of leaders to really start to think about what does this mean for business. And I'm going to close with André's incredible book, which is The New Nature of Business, talks about, and as André so eloquently said at the DLD conference just this weekend, it talks about how you make money, not how you spend it. And that is the core. What is the new business model that will enable us to go beyond shareholder value and to think about an economy that services people, planet, and prosperity at the same time? We know what we need to do from an economic perspective. The question is, are businesses ready in working with governments to make it a reality? Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can pass it to Stephanie because you just said our business is ready. So our business is ready. So sustainability has long been central to Nestlé. And I know that you factor many of these considerations into the decisions that you make. Can you tell us a little bit of how that works, but then also what the value might be in having consistency across companies and industries and beginning to aggregate this at the country level?
No, thank you, David. And it's truly a pleasure and honor to be here representing Nestlé in this really, really dynamic discussion. And I know it's going to be dynamic because we had some conversations before. But, truly from a Nestlé perspective, we have been focused on creating shared value for decades. It is at the core of what we do and who we are. And we're so proud to be a Swiss company. And when we look at just the ability to go beyond GDP and look at the commonalities, because we take measures from, or at, I should say, at a country level and at a local level, because there are different challenges that we actually face in the 188 countries that we're represented around the world. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but one that's appropriate for each of those particular areas. But in the end, it is ensuring that there is a standard pool of data or information that organizations should be all equally monitored on, so that we can all understand how we're making an impact in the future of this world. And that's, from a business perspective, what we're actually focused on. There's a tremendous amount of value and benefits to that when we look at greenhouse gas emissions, when we look at virgin plastic reductions, again, depending on where you are in the world, whether or not there's infrastructure to support those types of activities or not, there may be different approaches, but having the ability to have a constant standard of measurement is extremely helpful to help us all understand how we can actually make an impact.
Thank you. Andrea, if we can turn to you, and we'll follow up. This is an opportunity for all of you to get some additional thoughts out there, and then we'll have more discussion and involve, of course, the audience in this as well. So we're hearing that the case is relatively strong. There are businesses like Nestlé that are that see a lot of value in the prospect of having some more consistency, of aggregating some of that. But that, of course, is where government then often plays a really important role, right? You can require certain data collection, data disclosure. How do you think about the government's role in mandating in an area such as this one more generally? Yeah.
Thanks very much, David. And also from my side, it's great to be here. It's great to look around the room, because I think a solution can only be found if everyone from different sides really sits together and has a concrete discussion. And the government, or the Swiss government, is of course excited to be part of that discussion, because we share the goals that everyone has mentioned, and SDGs and prosperity, sustainability, that should not be a contradiction. So I'm fully with you, and I think it's extremely important, and it's also important to underline this today, because the discussion has moved a little bit away from these topics, and what's happening today across the Atlantic will most likely influence that as well. Now, I'm coming with a bit of a spoiler alert, I'm sorry. It needs to be practical, and it needs to be easy. So from our side, we happily support that, but together with business and together with civil society. It should not be against each other, and so that means collecting this data must be as simple as possible. So we will not come and require another set of reports. We will not come and require a huge amount of audits, which are extremely costly and don't really make an impact. So I think that's the one thing. And the other thing, you mentioned that Switzerland is not always the fastest in decision making. And why is that? It's because we consult. It's because the government doesn't just move ahead and decide something. It's because we consult the different stakeholders. And I'm sure within this room, I mean, it was indicated at the beginning, we more or less shared the same goals, but not everyone does. So we have to create a certain mass before we move ahead. And I think that unfortunately will take some time, but we'd happily be part of that and make sure that we, all of us, join the lobbying for such goals. But it's something we cannot just implement tomorrow. Also because, from what I said before, it needs to be practical and it needs to be easy, and we have to prove that it does have an impact. So if these three issues are together, I think then we have a chance. Thanks very much.
Wonderful, thank you. And so last but not least, Anna, what excites me about this project is that yes, it is about business and government and civil society, but there's also an opportunity for research, for innovation to come into this, right? What do we focus on? What is most important to measure in a practical way? But also then, what are the most effective ways of bolstering resilience? So you just stepped into the role of leading one of the world's leading research institutions, very much anchored here in Switzerland, but with links globally with scholars from all around the world. What excites you about this project? Why is it important?
Thank you, David, and thank you for the invitation. I think we all grew up with GDP, and GDP is used to understand how rich is a country and the progress. It helps us understand where the country is going to be in a few years. That's very simple, and that's the beauty of GDP. Easy to understand, easy to predict. Now the world is changing very rapidly, and we have always been interconnected, but even more today. What happens in a country, either from social turmoil, from climate change, from climate disasters, affects the other in a very nonlinear way. And so we need to find ways how we make a prediction of the resilience of a country. And the resilience of a country goes beyond the current economy today. It's about alliances, it's about natural resources. And so it is important to really understand how we measure this. And from the research point of view, this is a very exciting question. And even more exciting because it has a direct link with what happens in the world. So there's a direct link to have an impact on all of us today. And so that's super exciting. Among the disciplines that we can contribute from EPFL, of course, we are not social scientists, so here we cannot contribute, but we have a big effort on data science and understanding the links between all that's happening. Data science has really big contributions to do, and together to work with the population, with the countries, with the government, and here I'm very excited to be able to contribute to this and to help out.
Fantastic. So we have, let's give her a hand of applause as well. Sorry. Sandrine, if you could. All right. So Sandrine, everybody is in favor. Everybody recognizes the importance. But one thing that is clearly coming out is this need for input, for alignment, for pragmatism. We cannot end up in a situation where the costs of measurement, of enforcement, end up getting in the way of what we all want, right? Which is real meaningful progress, and as a result of being able to make better decisions. So you said there's potentially up to 1,000 indicators. If you were to now give some advice to Swiss-based global businesses, Swiss government authorities, research institutions, where should they focus?
Yeah, I think that's why we've really tried to now narrow that down into +1 or +2 indicators, actually. We have to remember, first of all, that GDP came out of post-war Bretton Woods status, where we needed to produce in order to ensure that that production was going to enable our economies to grow, and therefore there was an assumption that trickle-down would happen. Now, what we're seeing, and this is very much to Anna's point, we're in a totally different landscape, geopolitically, resource dependency-wise, value chain-wise, etc. So how do we look at the benefits, not just the cost of shifting away from GDP? So let me give a few really anchored thoughts so that we can think about why this is so important at this time. The first is that, as Jonathan indicated, there is all of the biodiversity loss, environmental impacts that obviously need to be costed. You talked about the externalities. But let's be very clear. Today at 1.5, we've already lost 3% of GDP. So we are now at 1.5 degrees. We have surpassed our Paris goals. The average temperature is 1.5. This year, we're predicted to lose, globally, 3% of GDP. If we're at 3 degrees, we will lose upwards of 10 to 12% of GDP. So the first question is, can we continue? Are we smart as economists, and this is the dialogue I have with governments, to continue to measure GDP, beyond the fact that we know it's destroying the planet and it's not creating social equity? My plea to governments is, no, this is the opportunity to create resilience within our economies. If we're only measuring GDP, we're in a loss. So let's be smart and measure plus indicators so we can start to balance our economies. The 5 key countries that put in well-being economies during COVID were the most resilient. Let's also remember that ESG funds during COVID did the best. Why? Because they have built more resilience across their value chain. So we have enough data to demonstrate this is the right thing. But to Andrea's point, we need to be very clear. And this is the whole conversation that's live right now. I don't know how many of you know what's happening in terms of the omnibus legislation that's happening at the European level. It's all about optimization, simplification, but somehow it's been distorted to also be about deregulation and moving backwards. We need good regulation. We need good indicators that are sound. We have enough data and enough examples to show that we can do this. But I fully agree. We've gone into a spiral of translating data into over-reporting, which, by the way, has gone into the hands of the 5 key accounting companies who are making a friggin' fortune on the back of business. And business is absolutely right in saying this is not on. So I think we're really in a good place. We have enough proof points. But now we need to show how we can do it, and we've got those proof points to show how we can do it, working collectively with business to see how we now integrate this into our new business models, and working with governments to look at their balance sheet, to look at their accounting frameworks, to see how we can do it. And I know that there are enough people working on those indicators to simplify and to give them as much value and even better value than actual GDP.
Sorry, if I may add to that, it also needs to be reliable. You know, you need to prove that whatever you take, it is reliable and you can easily compare it. Because if you manage to get a kind of a competition among countries, then maybe you're on the way to success.
Very good. Do you want others to come in? Very Wonderful, because I so agree with you, Andrea. And I think that's the key. That is really what now the Commission is working on and the OECD. How can it be reliable? We need to remember that GDP also has sub-indicators. So, you know, there is a history of using different types of indicators. But you're absolutely right. And everyone has to move in a similar direction. The last point that I think is really important is the narrative development and bringing more people on the journey. What we have seen in the 5 key governments that actually went towards beyond GDP and well-being economies is they had an underbelly of citizen support and also of institutional, academic institutions, data support, et cetera, to be able to really build up a narrative of change that resonated.
So if just a short thing to add, I think it's important that as we evolve, it becomes an objective measure and it's communicated as so, and that people don't interpret it as being part of certain political views. I think we should stay aware of that.
Yeah, that was actually kind of one of the areas I was going to lean into and really build on what Andrea said earlier in the whole pragmatic approach and measuring what it's right. And, you know, in this digital age that we're in, data or accurate data is truly the new currency. And so ensuring that we're capturing the right information and have the ability to act on it is equally, if not even more critical.
Stephanie, I'd love for you to respond to what Sandrine said about the sort of burden of current efforts to capture some of that non-financial information. Sandrine, you said, you know, a lot of accounting firms are doing fabulously well, helping companies comply with reporting requirements that may not necessarily get us to where we are. And of course, you represent a business that operates globally, and there's a lot of competition, and we hear increasingly business leaders in Europe, maybe complain is too strong a word, but raise concerns about the cost. And I think it's hard for people to distinguish between what is a case for good regulation